Now I can hear you better.
Oh, good.
I don't know what happened that first time. Hope it's just a Mercury retrograde glitch and nothing more. So,
Oh, is that what we're going through right now?
yeah, I believe we are. Well,
Oh, okay. Well, I hope the call doesn't get dropped
okay,
too.
right. The recording is going. I'm aiming through Skype recorder, so I got your Center for Christ Consciousness website up. I also have the website 1111angels.net up. I got that from your Facebook page. By the way, I just sent you a friend request. You can answer that at any time. But that 1111 Progress Group website, is that one that you've been updating recently, or has that been on the internet for a while without any recent updates?
That is not my website.
Oh,
That is an affiliated website with the spiritual community that I'm part of. It's part of the Urantia Revelation, and more specifically, subset of that, where we have received many messages of spiritual import from high-level celestial teachers. And I list that as a resource on my website because there's a tremendous amount of information available to people. And I like to, spread it around, so to speak.
okay, fair enough. Well, with that said, I guess we'll get this started now. I guess I'll start by saying I first heard about you from the interview that you did with Alfred Weber, like I don't know how long ago that was. I save a lot of interviews he does on my to watch later list, and it came up, and I really loved what I heard from you. Definitely wanted to get you on. So I see on your site there is an about the founder page, Donna D'Ingillo. Now there's a lot of D'Ingillo, or is it Ingillo? How do you pronounce it?
D'Angelo.
Okay,
D'Angelo.
D'Angelo. There's a lot of information here on this page. If I were to copy and paste that on the description of my when I upload this to YouTube, a lot of people are probably going to see that and say too long didn't read TLDR, but because people have lousy attention spans, and so anyhow, if you want to, yeah. With that being said, we don't have to go a full 2 hours today. I sound like a broken record, but I've said a zillion times that my show doesn't have a very big audience because I do 2 hour shows all the time, and people have lousy attention spans, so people don't really want to stay in front of the computer that long. So we don't have to go 2 hours, but if you want to cut it short, by all means, or if you want to. Well, if you want to do it, let's by all means do it. But if you want to cut it short, then then just let me know, and we can end before 8 o'clock. But anyhow, the long bio here. I guess I'll give you a chance now to give an abridged version of all the important stuff that's in that about the founder page on your website. So, and I'll make sure I get the important things in the bio for the video when I upload it to YouTube, and not the whole entire kit and caboodle thing here, which many people will not want to read in its entirety. So, go ahead. Who are you? What did you experience? What's in this about the founder article here? What did you experience that caused you to do the stuff you do? Please play the role of primary source. You got the floor.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. I think I've been spiritually wired, I would say, for all of my life, because I remember when I was very young that I felt like there were angels or some beings watching over me and protecting me. And I was raised in a very traditional Christian religion, but about my mid-teens to late teens, I started to doubt and become very agnostic about whether or not there was a creator. I was 21 when I first encountered the Urantia book, and it really rocked my world because it was what I was looking for in my search about understanding the nature of reality, who and what God was, our place in the universe, and that answered all of my questions. And so I was very involved in studying the Revelation with many study groups over the years. But in 1991, I had a very catastrophic event and personal loss in my life. And that started me on a quest to understand the nature of healing. And so I studied a lot of different forms of healing. But eventually, I became very involved in energetic healing and receiving information from my own spiritual and celestial teachers and helpers. And along with my understanding of the Urantia book, they helped me understand the nature of how our minds or our consciousness are interconnected with spirit. And it was through that that I developed a series of healing protocols that I used once I started the Center for Christ Consciousness in 2002 to help people, what you might say, unplug from this unreality system that feeds us with belief systems that are not healthy for our minds and bodies, and to help people tap into their organic spiritual nature and that essence of who they are as children of God, to begin to open up to the spiritual dimension of our energy beings. So that's my background in a nutshell. I've authored several books. I've done a lot of workshops and videos. Some of the videos are on my website now. So I've been doing this for a long time, it seems. And now I feel like we're at a place in our planetary evolution that spiritual vibrancy is starting to percolate in people and help them awaken to a bigger picture of reality and to a deeper level of reality of who we are as children of a loving creator parent who lives at the center of all things and has given us this wonderful creative plan to participate in as we evolve our consciousness.
Thank you. And to continue this interview, I guess I'll start right at the top here with the title and the subtitle, Center for Christ Consciousness, Open Your Heart, Expand Your Mind, Unite with God. Now, a lot of people don't seem to understand what the term Christ consciousness actually means, whether it has something strictly to do with the Christian religion or whether Christ is just a term for not so much a person, but a specific degree, level of consciousness that is, well, maybe one of the highest order. It seems like the term always comes up whenever you're talking about consciousness of the highest order, but why glorify a religious figure for that if that's what the term Christ is doing, glorifying Jesus Christ? But some would assert, well, that's not what it's doing. So for those that are confused about this, can you give us the who, what, when, where, why, and how of Christ consciousness, and a little history too, to understand where the term came from and why use a term like that when it's going to cause a lot of confusion, particularly with those in the spiritual but not religious community who are not religious because they realize that religion is a brainwashing fraud.
Well, that's a tall order, and I will try to break it down. So much of my approach to spirituality is based on the wonderful and expanded revelation of the information in the Urantia Book. And in the Urantia Book, they dedicate the last part of the book, part 4, to the life and teachings of Jesus. And the persona of Jesus is very misunderstood because he was actually a divine creator who chose to incarnate onto earth to live a human life and to develop his humanity to the point where he was both human and divine. And he did that for some specific reasons that maybe we can get into a little bit later, but I just want to set that as a stage for right now. And when I read the life and teachings of Jesus from the Urantia Book perspective, I was so enthralled by how he was able to take this raw human nature and develop it to the point where he was so imbued with his God self that I said, I want to do that. I want to be like you. And I believe that that part of that information was put in the Urantia Book to inspire humanity to aspire to that highest level of consciousness. We can call it divine consciousness. The term Christ consciousness was actually given to me by Jesus, who in his glorified persona is Christ Michael, who is the head of our universe, which is this is also something that is explained in the Urantia Book. So that name was actually given to me to call this organization Christ Consciousness. Now, that does not mean that it is Christian in nature, because the Christian belief is based on biblical teachings. The ministry that I have and promote is not based on the Christian Bible, okay? It's different. It's based on the reality of my experience with Jesus, based on my understanding of how he developed his consciousness that is very, very fully laid out in the Urantia, part 4 of the Urantia book. We have the potential as children of God to reach much higher states of consciousness, but we have had much interference within our minds and in our bodies of certain influences that have kept us stagnating in lower emotional feelings such as anger, confusion, anxiety, fear. And yet we can evolve out of these. We've also been indoctrinated in our planetary system of consciousness into many belief systems that are actually antithetical to the divine plan of evolution for what you might call human life. So the term Christ consciousness is very ecumenical. It's not promoting the Christian religion. It's not promoting any organized religion, because the approach I take is to say to a person, you have the power within you that is given to you by your Creator. And if you open up that inner door to have your own experience, you will be guided to develop your own center of Christ consciousness that is unique to your own individual expression as a child of God. It's a completely different approach, because here it's not like this is what you have to believe from these external teachings, doctrines, theologies, or rituals. It's all about going within, establishing that connection you have with your own Creator, because there are what you might call spiritual wires or influences within us that are trying to convey higher spiritual signals. But our minds are very static, and it's like having a bad telephone connection where all you hear is static on the line and you can't hear that divine inner voice speaking to you what it wants to help you understand about the nature of reality so you can develop yourself in this way. And in developing your Christ consciousness, what we're really doing is developing our intellectual potential, our creative potential, and our spiritual and moral potential. And this is something that has never been fully implemented on the planet in a major collective way. So I hope that sets a frame of reference here and answers your question.
Well, yeah, it does. Of course, you're going to cause a lot of controversy with what you just said about Jesus, because there's so many people that are going to agree to disagree on the did Jesus exist or not thing. And some would say, well, the question itself is a point of view thing, because it makes no sense to think of Jesus as a person, but some of the sources that assert he did exist have said that, well, he was a person, but he wasn't just any human. He was some sort of a divine incarnate, like a solar being, as I swear I heard Akashic Records reader Andrew Bartz say he was a solar being. His story that we know in the Bible has totally been twisted the wrong way by the wrong people who got no business twisting stories like that to brainwash people, but that's what they did. And well, I recently saw some presentation at Delaware Valley University by a presenter that I've hopefully been trying to get on my show, but he never seems to get back to me. Really want to talk about this, the true story of Christ and Mary Magdalene, and what exactly happened on their journey. And it's funny, after I saw that presentation, a lot of other videos and stuff came up almost as if by synchronicity and such, suggesting this guy knows what he's talking about, believe what he says, and all the people that, like David Icke and Jordan Maxwell, who give their take on how Jesus did not exist, because it's just well, first it's just some like basically a story of something that existed in the past, like Horus in the Egyptian tales, and also a creator that very similar to Jesus in the Hindu tales, as Jordan Maxwell has explained. And it's also a mimicry of the story of Jesus on the path of the sun across the zodiac. Well, that may be, but that's all a matter of as above, so below. If that exists like in the sky and time is cyclical, well, then there's nothing unusual about there being more than one Jesus throughout history, and it's totally wrong to totally left brain and closed minded. No disrespect to like Ike Maxwell and others, but they were being a little closed minded, saying, well, just because we have a similar thing in the past means that this didn't exist in the future. If time is cyclical, well then yeah, that's what's going to happen. So I'm babbling long enough here. When you hear the question of was Christ real or was he not, you kind of gave your answer earlier, but all those people who say he couldn't have existed because he's a similar version of other stories from other cultures from other times, and it's also a zodiac symbolism of astrology. How do you respond to that?
Well, I take a different approach entirely because there are so many ideas and concepts out there in our collective consciousness about who and what God is, who and what Jesus is. I take an entirely different approach. I say, okay, that's fine. You can believe what you believe, but just be willing to ask the question, is this real? Is this true? We have spiritual wiring, if you will, or circuits within our mind at higher levels of bandwidth that will tell us what information is truthful. And so what I say to a person is, if you're skeptical about Jesus and who he is, just take a few minutes to quiet your mind and press in and say to him, hey, Jesus, are you real? Is what I've heard about you true? Show me the truth. Help me understand who and what you are and what this represents. And that's basically the approach to take, because you can have many discussions and get absolutely nowhere with all of these different concepts. The focus of the work that I do is to help you trust in your own inner authority, so that no matter what anybody tells you and tries to convince you with all their logic and reasoning, if something is sitting in you and you're not feeling congruent with it, it's not resonating, then you have every right to explore that on your own and find out for yourself what is true about the nature of God, the nature of reality, and who and what Jesus is.
Thank you, thank you. Now moving on to the subtitle here of the page, open your heart, expand your mind, unite with God. First of all, open your heart, expand. Why open your heart, expand your mind, and not expand your mind and open your heart? Why did you choose those two words, open and expand, in the way that you chose them? And well, this is kind of interesting that you choose heart and mind, because those are like the top two things that people in the spiritual community need to improve. They would assert the mind and the heart. Of course, the heart arguably should take priority, and the argument for that from people like George Kavaslis has been the mind is in the head. They want control of our minds, so it's better to go with the heart where you can't go wrong over something with the mind, which the powers that be want control over. So you really can't go wrong with the heart because, well, that's his take on it. But I mean, I don't know. Maybe you're missing out on all the fun. They sort of, go with your mind, and when they hear the mind, that they often think of the third eye, the pineal gland. That's the chakra that would equate to the mind. And well, the heart is the heart. But then again, one would say by saying open your heart, expand your mind, unite with God. Well, the God, that could be the crown chakra, but what about the other four chakras that you haven't included there? Well, doesn't it make sense to include the root and the sacral and the solar plexus and the throat? But then again, does it not? Because it seems like the heart and the mind, like I said, are the ones that people most want to focus on. So why did you choose those two and the words open and expand? And what about what do you have to say to those who say you're leaving out the other chakras?
Well, no one has really told me that I'm leaving out the other chakras, and I'm not really doing that. This was just a motto that kind of just came to me. And what I've come to understand is that the heart tends to be more of the domain where you have your, and I'm going to use this word, trust bond with our Creator. And so many people have felt so disappointed by God, angry with God, blaming God for the conditions of this world and how horrific this world has become. And to me, that is a very heart-blocking attitude to take. So to have a little bit of a spiritual curiosity, if you will, to tap into faith, and I don't mean faith as a codified belief system. This is a living trust in something that is beyond our understanding. So there's an openness there. There's a willingness, I would say, that you would open your heart, open your emotions, open that place in you where there's been wounding, and ask for this bigger context to expand your mind with a bigger reality reference. This is where you unite with God, because there is a spirit that lives within us that is a direct link to our creator source. And the chakra system and the physical body puts up a lot of impediments. I use the word static, and that's kind of like just a general term to describe the interference within the whole mind-body continuum that doesn't allow for the spirit signals to get through very clearly until you start meditating and clear away a lot of the emotional and mental debris that is accumulated over the course of a person's lifetime. So the first step is to have that willingness to open your heart, to go beyond the pain of how you've been hurt, and to expand your mind with that willingness to say, is there a bigger picture here? What is the reality reference that you're trying to teach me? Because when you do those two things, then you start uniting with God. That's when the spirit is able to say, okay, finally, this person is willing to listen. And now begins this beautiful unfolding process of human divine communication. And then eventually leads to human divine collaboration, where you are really excavating yourself to find out what are those treasures within of your own personality, of your own innate nature, so that you can be the best person to the world and live more of your true purpose for your human life experience.
Thank you. And moving on to the the last one here, unite with God. It seems here that on the page here, Divine Parents and Inner Spirit, on your site, God is defined as our spirit source. Well, a lot of confusion there. Some would say, why use the term spirit and not soul? And that gets into the whole debate of whether or not spirit and soul are the same thing, or two different versions of something that's similar but yet different. I could babble all along on the stories I've heard with that, but I don't want to, because well, I'll give you the chance to do that. And well, source, what does it make sense to think of source as? And is source the same as soul, for that matter? There we go again, soul, spirit versus source and whatnot. Well, how do you make sense of that? Defining God as a spirit source. I usually define God as infinite consciousness, because that's what, well, everything is, and everything is consciousness. So why would not make sense to define God as infinite consciousness and everything that comes from it, rather than spirit source? Or are they one and the same? And if they are one and the same, can you help me make sense of the defining debate here?
Well, I'll certainly try. There is going to be some terminology debate, if you will, because that we are humans and we do like to debate ideas. And so I was trying to use terms that were accepted in our mainstream culture, that was trying to denote that there is a primal source for all reality to occur. And the nature of God is so vast that it encompasses both God as a spirit person with whom we can have an intimate relationship, a field of consciousness, mindal energy, if you will, emotional and mental energy, and also physical energy. So there are many dimensions or aspects to God as our primal source. And the nature of spirit was there to kind of connote that sense of we have a connection to spirit, and we actually have spirit living within us. The indwelling spirit is a gift that we are given by our creator parent source to help us tweak or think, perceive reality more along the way that God, as the creator of all, sees reality. God has the bigger picture. God is the bigger picture. And when we start to align our perception, then we begin to recognize that we have this spiritual source within us. Now, the difference between spirit and soul, now that's a good question. And these are some of the concepts that have been so magnificently laid out in the teachings that are in the Urantia book. They talk about the soul, the authors of the book, and these are authors coming from the higher divine levels of reality. They talk about the soul as the actual child of our experiences that we are co-creating with our spirit source. So, for instance, when you go out into the world and you are acting in a loving and kind and compassionate way, and you have an experience with someone that's a beautiful interchange, you are actually growing a soul. And this soul is a part of your being. And this is the soul that actually grows over time through our spiritual experiences. And at a certain point, when we are no longer able to live in our physical bodies, it is our soul that ascends, and it is our soul that unifies with our spirit to make us a more, what you might call, a spiritually unified individual. So that is a little bit of the distinction I'd like to make there. There's a lot more to it, but I'm just going to kind of keep it simple right now.
Well, that's a good thing. It's try to keep this simple. Well, that's something I have a very tough time doing, because I try to understand the nature of reality, and things always get more complicated when you're trying to understand that. That's why I'm the host of this show, though. But anyhow, moving on to some of the other things on this same webpage here, the inner spirit, which, and in parentheses you write, the thought of God, looking down below the divine father, in parentheses you write the word of God, and then a hyphen, Christ Michael, incarnated as Jesus. For one question I'm going to have is that the same as Archangel Michael was in Jesus' incarnation of Archangel Michael? Is that what you're trying to imply? And moving down, one more thing here, the divine mother, in parentheses you write the action of God, and then hyphen the Holy Spirit mother. Now that Holy Spirit thing, that Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, the Holy Spirit, whatever, some people assert that was just created as a further way of factionalizing Christianity and making religion all the more good for brainwashing. I'd like to get your take on that too. But anyhow, yeah, I'm asking a lot of questions here, I know, but why did you write the things you did in parentheses next to the inner spirit, the divine father, and the divine mother, thought, action, word, not respective order there, sorry, but and also Christ, Michael, Jesus, and your take on the whole Holy Spirit Trinity thing being a bad thing, actually?
Oh, I'm not saying that the Holy Trinity is a bad thing at
I didn't say
all.
you did, but I'm saying that's what some of the people who try to decrypt Christianity have asserted.
Yeah, well, I understand why people have objections about Christianity, because I faced that myself when I was in my earlier days. But reading the Urantia text was so truly, literally mind expanding. I really felt like the cobwebs in my mind and the confusion about the nature of reality had just gotten blown out of my mind, and I had a clarity within my being, because I felt like I was really reading some incredible truth that I had been longing for many years. So let me just lay out a schematic here for you. At the center of all reality, there is a place of perfection. And this is where the triune deity beings reside. One is called the Universal Father, the second person is called the Eternal Mother Son, and the third person is the Infinite Spirit. And they present a trinitized perspective, if you will, of everything existing all at once, existentially perfect, infinite and eternal, and it just exists. There's no beginning, there's no end, it's just there. From that central place in the nature of all reality, that is what you might call a pattern universe. And from there moves out like a mandate from God, where I wrote in the thought of God, the word of God, and the action of God. So each of those three persons of the Trinity represent a function of deity. So that the thought of God would be the plans or the idea of God. The word of God would be like the living language or the beginning of the structure of the thoughts or the ideas. And then the action would be implementing those plans. Now, those plans start out at the center of creation. And then there are spiritual beings who actually go out, the Divine Mother and Father, in a more localized way and start an evolutionary universe that is one day designed to reflect the perfection of the central universe. This is one of the core tenets of the Urantia teachings. And what I'm speaking about in that particular section of the website is that we have an immediate spirit mother and father who are actually contactable, and they will help us grow as evolutionary humans to cultivate our spirituality so that one day we become as perfected in our own sense of self as our Creator is perfect in that sense of who and what spirit is. So I try to write it in the context so that people who would have more of a Christian base would look at that and have some reference to what we're speaking about. Because in the Christian teachings, they talk about Jesus and the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is usually relegated to a male pronoun, but God can take both motherly and fatherly aspects. And the significance of that is that we can actually relate to them as parents who know the bigger picture and are there to provide us an environment as children to grow up and to become strong and independent and creative and enlightened beings. And that is our potential and our destiny. Now, Christ Michael and Archangel Michael are not the same individual. Christ Michael is the father or the creator of our sector of the universe in which our planet resides. And Archangel Michael is one of his heavenly helpers, if you will, who represents him and who does a lot of the what you might call spiritual legwork mandated by him. But they are not the same personality. And there's a lot of confusion about that, because most people, when they think of Jesus, they do not know him in his divine persona as Christ Michael. But he had a specific mission in coming to this planet to live a human life and to understand human life, and to also show humans how they could perfect themselves and become more God conscious and become higher evolved beings. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, did a pretty good job there, I believe. One little side thing, George Kavaslis, well, not many, but back in the day, there was an interview. I remember him saying something about the significance behind the word together. And it's meant to be a mimicry on the, an anagram of sorts on the three words to get her. And he basically, after that, explained the reason why. Well, why not to get him? Why to get her? When you say people got together, well, why is it feminized and not masculinized the word? Such a while ago, I didn't remember everything he said there, but this seems to resonate with the idea that in order to make divine feminine there has to be a uniting of more than one thing. And could it also be that the her he's referring to is the earth, because earth, divine feminine dominant, um, that's why it's called Mother Earth. Do you, by any chance, maybe you can refresh my memory here, when he said that together, it's really a mimicry on the words to get her, and why together and not to get them, to get him? Does it have to do with what you're talking about here regarding divine feminine masculine coming together?
I would say not. That is an idea that I've never heard before. I can't say it's resonating with me. I I've come to an understanding that the divine masculine and divine feminine aspects of deity are represented and personified in two deity beings, and they have different functions to perform within us. The Divine Mother, you might think of her as the actual womb of consciousness in which we live. She is the divine being that actually imbues us with consciousness, and that is one of the dimensions of her being, to give us seven spirits that are also hardwired into the seven major chakras that give us the ability to think, feel, and act. So, I can't speak about what this gentleman said. It's not something that I've ever thought about, and to me, it doesn't really have a lot of relevance to the work that I do, or what the nature of Christ consciousness is here to do. So,
All right, then
I understand that.
I'll change the subject then. Moving on to healing, generational and soul healing. Let's kill two birds with one stone here. This is under the personal healing and transformation tab. And when you're talking about generational healing, this is interesting, because I remember Daniel Teague sending me a message recently talking about a new healing he has, that he checks the soul all the way back through time to get into past lives. And this raises the question, well, what's the sense in healing a past life when it's done for? It's like healing a life in the past won't necessarily help heal your present life, or can it? Because I once had pain in my quadricep once, and when I asked some spiritual forces behind what was causing it, the answer I got was it was a past life manifestation of some degree. So that makes me wonder, well, does healing in the past and exploiting the fact that time's an illusion and heal in the past, how can it help you in the present time? And does that have anything to do with what the generational healing you're talking about is? And soul healing, well, okay, how do you heal the soul? And would it be better to do a spirit healing and not a soul healing? Because, well, spirit's maybe a little more or less complicated, because soul, that's like the eternal everything, but spirit is like getting a little bit more specific in the specific places and locations in time and space. That's the way George Kavaslis could bring his help again. He defined a difference between soul and spirit. Spirit, think of spears emanating out of the soul, like spear it. You throw a spear at it, the spirit goes out of the soul and manifests in acknowledged illusions of time and space. So that's his way of describing it. But anyhow, I'm babbling long enough here. Generational healing and soul healing, compare and contrast.
What I've come to understand and discover through my healing work is that we are a composite of these energies of consciousness. It's not a physical substance, but it does have a sort of substance, because it's influential in our minds and in our bodies. Generational healing is more of moving through a person's energy system to see where there might be blocks of an ancestral nature. This is not the same as healing, you might say, a past life. This is more of a going through a person's ancestral past, where their parents or their ancestors may have been involved in some very difficult situations. For instance, if there was a lot of war in a family background, or alcoholism, things like that. That is designed to help a person get those impediments corrected by the nature and the healing power of spirit, because spirit, as mother and father, I'm going to talk about generational healing in conjunction with the divine parents, because they provide the template or the pattern for the correct male and female patterns. And this, it can impact the DNA, and it can impact the epigene where a lot of these memories, genetic memories, are stored. So when I'm doing a healing session, I just open it up and I ask our parents to come in and to identify those places where that person needs to be, I don't like to use the word corrected. It's more like transcend the memory experience that has impeded the emotional maturity or the moral development of a person, and it has a physical repercussion as well, to help the body release the memory imprint of the negative experience so that the whole mind-body continuum can communicate better and start to function the way it was naturally designed. The soul healing is kind of going at another deeper level. And here it's more of a liberation of going deep into a person's energy system, into a very unconscious place where the innate bond between creator, deity, parent at the center of all has a fundamental primal bond with the individual human. And it's designed to help a person's soul be what you might call expanded or liberated to communicate with your own individual self-concept. Because the way our Creator sees and knows us is very different than the way we see and think about ourselves. We have these self-concepts that we create over the course of our lifetime. And some people have very negative self-concepts because maybe they didn't get the love they needed, the validation they needed from their families. But at the core, in this primal relationship, your core essence, there is a love bond that is unbreakable, but there's a lot of what you might call interference between a person's conscious recognition of that love bond and to act from that place. And that's basically what soul healing is representing, going into that deep, deep place of a person and helping that person begin to perceive who he or she is from that primal place of the connection with their divine creator, spirit parent. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I'm trying to make things a little confusing here by comparing like generational healing with past lives and all that. And well, I'm just being the artist. That's just the artist in me. But if that's not what it is, thank you for clarifying that. Moving down the list here, redefinition of ego. Recently saw a video, Brad Johnson, who channels Adronis, where he pointed out the ego is probably the most dangerous virus on the face of the earth. Why he chose to use the word virus, I'm not quite sure, but in a sense, that's the thing that is the ultimate thing that would hold back consciousness, according to some. So when you try to redefine it, I hope you give it a better definition when in your redefinition of ego that maybe helps people realize that this is not something we should be getting really out of whack and be able to control our egos so we can ascend, if you will. So what is the redefinition of ego all about?
Well, I just started to speak about that in talking about the self-concept. To me, the self-concept, how a person perceives himself or herself, is really more of that ego mind. I really don't like that word ego. It's a made-up word. It's a made-up. It's coming from the individuals who were first involved in trying to understand human psychology. How the mind works, how we function, and I think it's a time to retire that word because it's really about our self-concept. Everything that we do and think and how we behave comes from how we perceive ourselves. That's it. Bottom line. Okay. The problem with the self-concept that it is not representative of our true status as children of God. And this is very difficult for people to understand because they feel so betrayed or untrusting of the godly nature, very confused by who and what God is, because there are so many belief systems on this planet, and there are many interpretations from those belief systems. So this is my approach. I don't care what those belief systems are. I'm not here to debate what those belief systems are. I am here to help a person tap into their primal core essence. And in that essay, A Redefinition of Ego is trying to contrast and compare the self-concept with the core essence, because it is possible for your self-concept to transform. Your self-concept to begin to feel that you are validated and valued as a child of God, that you have worth and purpose for your life. That is where your core essence is holding for you. Sometimes the self-concept can't hear that or pick up on that because the influence of the external culture and the conditions of a person's family environment or cultural environment is not supporting that person to find out what that core essence is. And so this is why it's really important to redefine how we conceive of ourselves, because the ego is such a tricky and limiting word that we need to evolve beyond that. And that's why I use the term self-concept, because this is taking us back into a recognition that, oh, maybe I don't really know who I am, and it's okay to question that. And when you go back into that core essence of who you are and begin to tap into that, slowly, it's like peeling that onion skin, a person begins to feel that validation, begins to feel a sense of worthiness and purpose, and gets to try different things. You know, you don't have to be defining yourself as, oh, I'm an accountant or an athlete. You know, we rigidly define ourselves. And if we really can accept the idea that we are children of God, we have infinite potential, then why can't we explore our infinite potential here as humans during this lifetime? And that's what I'm speaking about in this essay.
Well, that to answer that question of why can't we exhibit our true self, infinite self as humans, well, don't even get me started on the list that people can give as to why that's the case. I mean, one
Oh,
question.
I know why it's the case. I mean,
Yeah.
I understand why that's the case. And this is one of the things that the work that I'm doing is involved in, doing a lot of the cleanup work so people can get out of those horrible mindsets and rigid identification with how they see themselves, and participate in their own transformation. So as more people transform themselves, then this world will transform, because transform people transform the world. Doesn't work the other way around. We have to do it as individuals.
Yeah, what I mean when I say this is, why is it that some people have the ability to move like a piece of paper using telekinesis easily, while others don't? I eventually gave up doing this, but for a few, like almost every day for a couple of years in a row, like I tried to uh, use my telekinetic powers, my infinite telekinetic powers, which everybody has. And Star Wars movies are not a joke in that regard. They're fact, truth under the guise of fiction in regards to how like Jedi and Sith powers work. You can move things like Yoda moved Luke's ship out of the swamp. I tried to use that to move just a teeny tiny itsy bitsy little piece of paper, and I couldn't make it move after trying a daily basis for a couple years. And I eventually decided, you know what? I got better things to do with my life. Screw this. I'm just wasting my time, taking away from other things I can do. So, well, that's great and all that I decided to move on, but I can't help but ask, what am I lacking that's preventing me from being able to do something that I believe I can do, I know I can do, I've seen other people do it. What is it that they have that I don't?
Well, it's like saying, why am I not a Mozart or and a famous athlete? We are all endowed with certain creative potentials, but they are not all the same. So maybe there's something in your specific makeup that is not as prone to do that in a really kind of like natural, organic way. And that's not to say that you can't develop it, but maybe that's not what your spirit within you is seeing that is going to give you the most happiness or success in life, the most greatest understanding of who you are. So we come with all these kind of like innate gifts, if you will, but we're not excavating and cultivating our gifts on our own. There is this spirit source within us that's trying to help us to use our potential for higher purposes for our lives. And not everyone has the same endowments. It's just not true that we're all the same in that respect. Now, is it possible to develop that part of yourself? I would say it probably is, but maybe it's going to take a lot more time and effort, and maybe there are some things that you're missing about doing it. Maybe there's not the right motivation. Maybe your mind isn't focused the appropriate way. I don't know. I'm just kind of giving examples out because if something is not working for you, there's probably a reason for that. And that's up to you to explore and not just say, well, it's not working. This is the thing to take into your spirit and say, okay, where am I going wrong? What do I need to do to cultivate this part of myself? There's something in you that is in all of us that is so enriched with, beautiful treasures, but we have to be the ones that are willing to recognize that we are not in this human experience alone. We have a God source there with us, and that God source is trying to get our attention. And sometimes these phenomenon of mind, I don't necessarily call telekinesis a spiritual activity. I don't think it is. I think it's a mindful phenomenon of people being able to use certain mindful powers to move things around. I don't want to get off the subject here a little bit, but we're not all endowed with the same creative gifts. And it was not designed that we would be. We were designed to be diverse and to explore our diversity. And that's a beautiful thing, that we each have the potential to cultivate our own unique diversity in the ways that our Creator is trying to compel us and speak to us and collaborate with us.
No question. And now there's a couple of nisses on the bottom of the list: forgiveness and the stillness. Well, I guess we'll go one by one here. The thing about forgiveness that is highly controversial, particularly among those in the spirituality community, is to what extent does it make sense to forgive someone, and when you're seeking justice, does that ultimately mean you are not seeking forgiveness? Because is justice a glorified revenge? But then again, if someone does something really dick to you, I mean, does it make sense to forgive them? Does it make sense to not say, okay, I can't let you do this. I have to find a way to get some justice for your evil, sinister, Sith-like acts. And if I don't, then that sends a message to the universe that anyone can take advantage of me if I forgive everyone. So forgiveness is for all intents and purposes, a sin in that regard. So how do you make sense of whether or not you should seek or not seek forgiveness, and do you not seek justice, or do you seek justice because justice may be construed as glorified revenge? So let's start with that, and then we'll get into the stillness. Very interested in why you chose to put the word the before stillness, implying that stillness is something very significant. But let's start with forgiveness. What's the deal with that?
Forgiveness is an act of empowerment and self-liberation. When we forgive people who have wronged us, we are putting ourselves back in the power position that we have control over our feelings and over the situation. When a person injures another individual, whether it's conscious or not, and the victimized individual feels wronged, feels disempowered, holding on to those emotions is very destabilizing, and it just festers in the person's mind and body and in their emotional energies in their hearts. And this can take a person down a very dark path. They can create all different kinds of revenge scenarios, all different kinds of victimized, oh, it must have happened to me because I'm so bad, or, there's just a whole number of ways that the mind can trick us when something detrimental happens and we have no control over it. So when we're forgiving a situation, a person, what it's doing, it's not releasing that person of their responsibility. That's not what this is saying. It is releasing us from feelings of anger and revenge so that we can begin to see that offending person as someone who is spiritually immature and maybe even spiritually ill, who doesn't know a higher way to operate, and they acted out of their own immaturity and their own lack of self-esteem and self-worth, lack of compassion or understanding for another person. When we forgive, we are saying to that person, you have no longer the power to hurt me anymore. Irrespective of whether that person gets it or not, is understanding that they've been forgiven, that's not important. It's what happens to us as the individual who's been victimized. We are now moving out of that victim experience into a power position. It's very liberating to forgive. Weights come off of people, literally, energetically. I've done a lot of work with people on forgiveness. And when we work in that forgiveness energy and that comes in, people say, oh, I feel like a weight has come off me. And they begin to see that other person in a new light as why they did that, because they were so hurting themselves. So the justice issue is another element of that, because we're kind of saying, okay, it doesn't matter to me if this person is going to receive justice or not. That's going to be up to civil authorities, or even later on in a person's eternal career, if they have to go and get a life review and have to see the consequences of their negative actions toward another person, and they're going to have to deal with that. But when we forgive in our own sense of self, we are empowering ourselves. We are liberating us from that difficult experience. And it's immensely, immensely soul satisfying. And it just gives us a sense of we don't have to carry this burden around with us anymore. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and since you mentioned the life review, I might as well go off on that and ask you a couple of things I and a lot of other people don't understand about how it actually works. I mean, the general consensus is everyone who passes away gets a review of their life when they on the other side. And well, just like you said, if it's not pleasant and what they did to other people wasn't pleasant, they have to see that. And well, how is that going to affect the soul consciousness entity that just went on the other side and had to go the life review? Well, it appears that if you don't lead a very great life, where you don't have a lot to give, where you didn't give much and you don't have anything to be grateful for when you pass away, then heaven will not be very pleasant for you. And that's not me talking. That's a girl I know who passed away on heroin overdose talking. When I had a psychic channel her, she said anybody who says heaven is wonderful doesn't know the whole story. If you're like me and you don't have a lot to be grateful for in your life on earth, then heaven really isn't all that pleasant. So her life review must not have been all that great, but heaven is not good for her, and yet, well, she's still in some other world of some sort that enabled her to be able to channel through the psychic medium that I was, whose skills I was utilizing at that time during the session. So, how do you see the life review happening, and can you, you think maybe that there exceptions, I should ask, to what that person says? Is it possible that you will have that you'll be able to lead a happy afterlife, even if you didn't lead a good life here on Earth, and that girl just, well, for whatever reason, didn't seem to be leading a good afterlife in heaven?
There are a lot of levels to this, and I don't know if I can really give you a satisfactory answer. And I don't think that whatever this person was channeling was probably the 100% accurate perspective either. You have to keep in mind that we're seeing something when people recount their experiences, they're seeing through the lens of their own experience. That may or may not be the fullest reality picture there is, though, okay? My understanding is based on the comprehensive description of what happens in the stages of transferring from this world to the next dimensional level. And my understanding, and they talk about this in depth in part 2 in the Urantia book, they talk about the awakening where you're given an upstepped energy system, and so you pick up where you left off, pick up on the next level where you left off on Earth. And so if you have a lot of emotional baggage, and a horrific life experience, that's going to come back to you, okay? But what is being offered is a sense of rehabilitation. And that's kind of the work that I'm doing now. It's like this first level of rehabilitation work that happens on the other side that is actually being presented here now, so that when a person passes on, they're in a much better place to see that the nature of reality is love. But if a person who has a horrible experience on this planet and wakes up with those memories coming back, it's going to be very difficult for that person to feel worthy to accept the love that they're going to be given an opportunity to see. And when you're confronted with your worst mistakes, if you're not in that state of understanding that this is for your highest good to see, so you can learn from your experiences to make a better choice, it's going to be very difficult for a person to want to go on. And some people may not choose to go on because they're still operating from this small earth plane perspective when the universe is such a place of light and goodness and beauty and love, but they can't it's not like in their mental bandwidth yet. You have to experience it. So I don't know what happened to this individual. I can't say for sure, but my guess is that she had some type of recollection experience of her life on Earth and in this next dimensional level, and she just couldn't make sense of it. It was just too much for her to process. But there are a lot of helpers on the other side, and there is a lot of love and compassion and understanding for people to begin to see their life in a bigger context. So I hope that that provides you a little bit of a context there.
Yeah, it does. Thanks, and glad you pointed out there's a lot of possible different answers to this. So anyone who says they have the definitive answer is, well, not necessarily wrong, just not totally right, as they're ignorant of how the whole thing works. But anyhow, moving on down the list here, the stillness. I could click on this and see what you wrote, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let you say explain and what you wrote there, and I'm really interested, like I said, why is it that you put the word the before stillness? It's like you're defining the thing to point out it's something very, very significant, so it's worthy of having the word the before it. So what's that all about too?
Well, the stillness is a state of mind, and it is not implying that the mind current is going to be completely still. It's a state of mind where you take yourself away from the busyness of the external culture where we're getting bombarded by all this external stimuli of work or media, electronics, whatever. What I said in the beginning of the program was that there's a lot of static within our mental and emotional currents that interfere with the spirit signal. And the stillness is a state of being where you're training your mind to have some longer spaces of actual quiet or stillness where the divine signals, the divine information can penetrate through all of the different feelings and ideas and convey something of a higher truth value into your conscious mind. This is not a mental activity that we in our culture have been trained to do. The Christian religion doesn't really teach this. It's better understood in some of the Eastern traditions. But when you talk about the word meditation, there's all different kinds of meditation. It's transcendental meditation. There's just a whole different kinds of meditations. This is a meditative state, but its purpose is to provide those longer periods of quiet or stillness in the mind for that spiritual bandwidth to grow so that the individual is beginning to pick up on those spirit signals that are coming from your own indwelling spirit that comes from your creator source parent at the center of all things. We have a wire or a connection, but like I said, that connection exists in the higher bands of our consciousness, and when we've got these emotional and mental bandwidth just going the spiritual information has a hard time getting through all those dense layers. Consequently, in the stillness, we're making space in between the mental and emotional bandwidth so the spirit can start dropping down ideas that will be edifying and uplifting and maybe thought-provoking or curiosity-provoking, so that individual is beginning to pick up on what the inner voice of God is trying to convey.
Thank you very much. I'd like to move on to planetary transformation here. The couple things here. Well, we already went the message of forgiveness, but the planetary awakening and healing of human consciousness. Well, they often say work yourself at a personal level rather than trying to change the world. Humans are just one tiny Mandelbrot set within the greater Mandelbrot set that is Earth. So one person can't change the world like that. It can't be done. There are people who have done things that made them household names around the world, but even that doesn't necessarily change the world to some degree because, well, there's a lot of people who are not affected by it in some specific way, like all the tribes people in the rainforests and jungles around the world, and like the nomads out there in the desert. They aren't affected too much by the people that do things to make themselves household names overnight, like Edward Snowden did, and that to that degree. But anyhow, when you want to heal human consciousness, well, work it yourself. Do things for yourself, and what you give out will be reflected. It's the law of attraction. I prefer law of reflection is a better term, I think, because it's not always retracting. It's also reflecting and giving out and whatnot. But anyhow, when you want to heal other people, now this is a controversial issue because it seems like there's a debate going on whether or not it's okay to do spiritual healings on others without their permission. Some assert that's a very big no-no, and it's a sin if you do. But if that's the case, well, then call me a sinner, because I've been utilizing the abilities of Daniel Teague of Vega Star Healings to do chakra balancings and aura cleansings and timeline hook removals of things that could cause health problems in other timelines and time streams or in the future on this timeline for people, which Daniel Teague has the ability to to tap into and heal, and he's willing to heal people in secret. Like tell them I want to give my parents, like for example, a timeline healing on for Mother's Day and Father's Day. So may I ask you to do that? And you don't tell their parents. Well, it seems like a nice gift on the face of it, but have you just committed a sin because you tried to heal one's consciousness without asking them for permission? So this is a debatable issue. Do you have anything to say on healing others' consciousness and doing spiritual healings on people without asking them for permission? And also the whole thing about how much improving yourself can improve the world, because if you don't start with yourself, then, well, you're not going to see results out there in the rest of the world.
Well, I'd like to talk about the two aspects of planetary transformation.
All right.
Because the part does have an influence in the whole, and the whole of the planet is now being influenced by the rest of the universe. And what I really would like to speak now about is the evolutionary plans for worlds of material origin like ours are, that are inhabited by human-type people who have free will but have a physical corporeal body. I'll get into the other dimension about healing people when they're not consciously aware of it in just a moment. But I want to set the stage here because this is very fundamental to understanding what is happening on the planet here. The universe of time and space, or the universes of time and space, are segmented into subsections. And we live in what the Urantia Book describes as a local universe that is populated by many other material worlds such as ours, and they are also administered in subsections. And one of the subsections is a system. At the head of a system is a spiritual being who is charged with taking those inhabited worlds, those material worlds that start out at very primitive levels of life, of evolutionary life, plant life, animal life, and to evolve them to a very high state of what you might call a utopian or a heavenly culture. Now, this happens over the course of thousands and thousands of years, maybe even millions of years, okay? It's a very long process. Well, the head of our system at that time when our world was evolving, his name was Lucifer, and he got it in his own mind that he was going to deviate from the divine plan of evolution, because our Creator, Mother, and Father have determined an evolutionary plan for all the worlds within their universe. Well, Lucifer and his assistant Satan decided they were going to try something different, and take their system and develop it in a different way, antithetical to the divine plan. When that happened, and those beings influenced the spiritual head of our world and took our world into rebellion against the divine plan. Okay, this happened roughly 250,000 years ago. There's a description in the Urantia Book of the event of the planetary rebellion and also the system rebellion. And the work that I've been doing is designed to help people get out of this rebellion mindset, which has had many, many devastating consequences on the planet through all of the institutions, our social institutions, institutions of religion, education, science, philosophy, health and healing. It has taken our planet off course and made us very warlike. We have a very anti-social nature when it comes to the rest of the universe. So what is happening now is that the rebellion has been adjudicated at a higher level, the system level, and now there is this massive outpouring of spiritual help coming to the planet to help us remember who we are, to help us rejoin the universe family. And hence, that's why we're seeing all this information coming through in all different areas from many different people who are being imprinted with this information, but they're experiencing it through their own individual filters and their own individual understanding. Okay? The idea here is that the massive spiritual outpouring is designed to encourage each individual to open and let go of this rebellion mindset, which is like this virus that has impacted our system of consciousness. It's impacted our bodies. We have a lot of diseases on the planet that we should never have had. We have a lot of emotional problems, a feeling of abandonment and betrayal. This is all a part of the rebellion influence. We have confusion of many different belief systems. This is all also a byproduct of the rebellion, and the way our industries develop too. So much of that has developed in a deviant mindset. So the work of healing is designed to help a person be unplugged, if you might say, or moved out of, transcended out of that deviant mindset, an emotional set, to ascend into a higher level of consciousness where you have more direct conscious contact with your spirit. Now, I cannot speak for others. I can only speak from my own experience, that when I want to help a person who may not be receptive to healing, I always make contact with that person's spirit and I ask for permission. And I just send them love. And I just ask for that person's highest good to prevail. I believe that that is a more safe way to help people without their being, to go into the whole debate of, oh, you need healing, because so many people just aren't going to understand this bigger context of what's happening on the planet. And so they're going to be skeptical or very fearful or even very ridiculing of it. So I can't answer that question, for anybody else. But for me, I always just ask that person's spirit if I can send love and if that person is open to any more levels of healing or transformational work. So I think that is a safer way to approach it, because, when healers send healing energy to another person, it's going to be up to that person whether or not to respond to it. And some people will be very dense and they won't pick up on it at all. And some people may feel it and they may reject it or they may accept it. This is a very gray area that we're dealing with right now. And I don't know if anybody really has the correct answer, but this is the approach that I've taken, and it resonates with me. It feels safe to me to be able to do that. And I don't feel like I'm violating another person when I'm just sending them love and their desire for their highest good to prevail. So I hope that makes sense to you.
Yeah, thank you. Now, that thing you just mentioned about the war in heaven of sorts, funny you mentioned that. This is something that's been coming up. I've been hearing a lot of my videos recently, and on one of my recent interviews with Bennett Vonderheide, the ancient alien stones guy, the Namali stones guy, I was asking him about this very thing, and he couldn't really comment on it. But you mentioned, yeah, there was this war in the heavens of sorts, and I'd like you to elaborate on this, because, well, this universe seems to be telling me from all the things I've seen, this is an important thing to be concerned about and maybe touch on. You mentioned 250,000 years ago. Now, time, of course, is an illusion, but the thing that I'm noticing about that, about 50,000 years after that, was said to be the time period when the Anunnaki that Zecharia Sitchin glorifies in his books, they genetically engineered humans by combining Homo erectus DNA with Anunnaki DNA to create Homo sapiens as a slave species. Again, that was about 50,000 years after this war in heaven of sorts that happened 250,000 years ago. And you mentioned that Lucifer and Satan, they're not the same entity. Satan was Lucifer's master. Well, what is Lucifer? The term has to do with like bringing light. Lucifer does. Some associate that with Venus, but in one of these recent videos where I heard about this, the guy said that Lucifer should be thought of as the alter ego the malevolent counterpart of Archangel Michael. If Archangel Michael was a Jedi, his Sith counterpart would be Lucifer, and he was the other side. Archangel Michael was of this war in heaven. One of the people I've listened to actually asserted between the good and the bad forces. So this war that you say happened 250,000 years ago, does it have any causal connection to the 3D Earth that we are on? And well, if what the results of it, what influence does it have? Would it have on our reality? And well, yeah, please give your take on Lucifer and Michael and the possible connections and differences there. But what are the other significant things that happened in this so-called war that has to do with how it affects us?
It's almost too numerous to articulate in a show like this, because the effects on this world have been egregious. I mean, we have been so violated by this a cosmic event that we are just now in the early stages of letting this be corrected, and this is what I write about in the planetary transformation section of the website. We are in a period called the correcting time, when Christ Michael and Mother Spirit as the Holy Spirit are making available innumerable spiritual beings and unprecedented spiritual help to help us evolve out of this. It's not like they're going to come down and wave a magic wand and make everything better, although they could do that. But this is an evolutionary free will universe, and they are giving us the opportunity to heal ourselves and get spiritually up steps so we can correct the social problems of what happened during the rebellion. So many of these events that you're talking about, you know, the Star Wars, the Jedi thing, you know, that's some of our cultural myths that have their basis in this actual factual event. Now, it would be very helpful for people to, if they're interested in this, just read the papers in the Urantia book on the Lucifer Rebellion and on the Planetary Rebellion, because I think that provides the best cosmic overview of what happened on the planet. I've listened to other people and their theories and their experiences, and they're talking about the Anunnaki, and I all relate it to the fact that what happened here on this planet during the rebellion, that when a planet is deemed habitable by the cosmic administration, if you will, then there is a spiritual leader, or a spiritual, the term they use in the Urantia book is planetary prince, a spiritual being who comes here with a staff of individuals to shepherd the indigenous human races to a higher planetary culture. That means developing the society and all of the different aspects of society, industry, religion, family life, education, health, learning how to, use the land and interact with the animals. So when a planet is ready for this level of upstepping, this spiritual administrative authority, who is unseen, he's operating in a higher dimensional bandwidth, but he actually brings with him a staff of ascended beings from other planets who have agreed to come and inhabit a corporeal body to help the indigenous people learn how to develop culture, how to develop civilization in different areas. Well, when this event occurred, there were 100 of these, what you might call glorified humans, that were assisting the planetary prince as staff members to help the indigenous population. 60% of them actually decided to rebel and follow the Lucifer sophistries of what was being purported as a different way to evolve civilization. 40% stayed loyal to the divine plan. The 60% who rebelled started mating, and they were not supposed to mate together, and they developed what you might call a superhuman race. And they were the ones who were basically in charge of the planet. And the leader of this superhuman race of these glorified mortals who were here, the head of them was the head of business and industry in his section of developing the indigenous population. And he was the one who was kind of in control of all the other sectors of the planetary advancement. So there was this big clash of the loyalists and the rebels. And this is where all of that mythology has come from. Now, I believe that there were other planets. In the Urantia book, they talk about, out of potential about 700 planets at the time, there were 37 worlds that went into rebellion. Now, in the Urantia book, they don't tell us how many of those planets were of a higher advanced state. But I believe that some of these other planets did interfere with our evolution on this world, and they tried to keep us in this rebellion mindset. This is all taken care of now. This is all done. These planets don't have any more influence, if they did, and we're in this big cleanup. Now, what has happened on this planet? It's so big, like I said, I really can't go into it in great detail here. Let me just say that when I do my generational healing, I see scripting of actual language in the DNA that is kind of like what you might call operating against the way DNA was supposed to work. And what we see in our culture is a lot of skepticism and feelings of being abandoned or betrayed by God, and very deep senses of unworthiness. Many people feel unworthy, especially people who have been kind of coming from some very tradition-bound religions that do not foster a person's self-worth. And the institution of religion was very, very heavily influenced by this rebellion mindset, because this head of our planet, he wanted to be the god of our world. And he was a very jealous and kind of a nasty being. He didn't like humans. He felt, he thought we were dirty or, beneath contempt, because, indigenous humans are very primitive, and they're probably not very sanitary or pretty to be around. And he didn't like that. And he wanted to speed up evolution. So he put in a lot of coercive measures to evolve our consciousness, but it was in a very punitive and very judgmental way. And that's where a lot of our religious traditions have come from, about, God being punishing and judgmental. And when our father, Christ Michael, decided to incarnate as Jesus, he was here to begin the cleanup of this planet. He actually confronted Lucifer and Satan, and there's a little bit of a biblical report or a biblical account of that, but it's much greater fleshed out in the Urantia book of, he's basically saying, no, you're not going to have any more power here. And it was pretty much decided that, these rebels aren't going to be able to influence planetary culture very much anymore. But now we're in the cleanup phase, and it's up to each individual to come to an understanding of this extremely important event that very few people know about. Even the biblical account is very well, it's basically non-existent. It's only maybe mentioned a couple places about the war in heaven. But this was a huge event that had severe repercussions in our DNA, in the way we think, the way we feel about ourselves, and our whole reality reference point. We don't understand that there's life on other planets, and that there are many worlds of many dimensions, because we were quarantined from the rest of the universe when this event happened. There was an actual, the mother spirit whose spiritual energies just pervade every planet. She cut them off to isolate us and the rest of the universe, so that we would not infect the rebellion would not affect the other places of the universe. So this was a big event, and I'm sure that this will be discussed in many quarters in the future when more people are aware of that, and the repercussions of that will be discussed very, very intently, because these are cosmic lessons that we as humans need to learn in order to become not only good planetary citizens, but good cosmic citizens of the universe family, of which we are integral members. So, I mean, I can go a little bit more into it, but that's it in a nutshell. I mean, we are coming out of it now, and that's why there's this big, massive toxic cloud. Like, they've released all this toxic energy, and all this truth is coming out about how we've been suppressed, and how our minds have been controlled. This is all a part of the rebellion agenda. And there are many, many spiritual angelic helpers under the banner of our Archangel Michael. He's one of the big spiritual personalities that are helping us clean up this planet and the other planets that also rebelled. So this is a huge cosmic event that we're all participating in, and very few people really understand what is truly happening. It's a good thing that all this truth is coming out, because now we're getting a bigger picture, and we are given a better way to make choices about, do we want to participate in these mindsets of control and war and greed and corruption, or do we want to change ourselves and live lives of fulfilling purpose and loving and caring for one another and building better social organizations from that heightened sense of consciousness? So this is kind of where we are now. We're in this critical phase of the old way just kind of right in our face, but a new way also starting to dawn in our hearts and in our minds. And more people are picking up on that, and it's wonderful, because we are getting a lot of help. We are not doing this alone. And the more we can collaborate with Spirit, and we will get more help, and we can really turn this planet around in a shorter period of time, the more people who start to understand what happened and want to participate in the correcting action that's underway now.
Right, and it would certainly help if some of our young ones got involved somewhat. And I say that because I'm looking at the some of the books and things for sale here on your site. There's an MP3 Stillness for Teens and Exploration into Stillness Meditations for Children. The first thing here, Stillness for Teens. Now, interesting thing about this, is it possible that this Stillness for Teens could work for everybody? And I ask that because Indigo Child Matias De Stefano from Argentina video back in the day, he actually explained the reasons why so many people in the world today are, quote, acting like the teenager. And he elaborated on what he meant by that and how we are acting like teenagers, and he explained the reasoning behind that. But if he's right, does that imply that, okay, if everybody's acting like people ages 13 to 19, does that mean that this Stillness for Teens thing could be suitable for people of all ages? And this can the same be said about the meditations for children thing. If children are so open-minded and creative, more so than adults, that's why the reptilians want to gobble them up so much, then does it make sense to use these meditations for children for, well, everybody? So what do you have to say about my questions and theories here about using things for young people for everyone?
Well, a child is still developing an attention span. A 3-year-old does not have the same attention span as a 10-year-old or a 20-year-old or a 50-year-old. So the Stillness for Children is to start out children with the idea that you have a God presence within, and if you're quiet and you learn to kind of talk into your heart and mind, you can start to pick up on that spiritual energy and that spiritual guidance. The Stillness for Teens was just there to help teens start to open up to, young adults start to open up to their own deity relationship. The come into the stillness and the stillness routines are very similar. They're not exactly the same, because I try to focus the teen one on the idea more of, this is a companion that can help you through your life even better than your human parents can, because sometimes the human parents aren't involved or don't really understand the child, and so this is a way to really kind of focus that individual, that young adult, and recognizing that you're going to have some really good parental influence all your life if you develop this relationship as a young person, and you can take that into your adult life in a much more habitual way, I suppose. It's a better way to say it. Yeah, you develop that habit, and that becomes just an organic relationship that you develop over the course of your adult life.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. Looking also here, another one of these book lessons on prayer. Interesting thing said about prayer by one of the speakers at one of the conferences I was at. He pointed out why certain prayer doesn't work and why other ones do work, and it's not just the state of mind behind the person that's giving the prayer, but there's also other factors involved. And when it comes to praying, well, is prayer the proper word? It seems kind of more of a religious connotation. Those of a spiritual but not religious nature don't really pray. A proper term would be, I guess, ask. But you never hear Christians use the term ask. They always use the term prayer whenever they suggest someone ask for help from God. They say pray to God, never ask to God. But maybe that has something to do with what the speaker had to say about why prayer would work and what it would not work. But anyhow, what are the lessons on prayer that you can offer? I'll give you the chance to tell us that now, how to improve our prayer for dummies. You got the floor here.
To me, prayer is more about learning how to communicate with the spiritual helpers that we have, and to collaborate in the building of the divine plan on a planet. Because we have been so isolated for so much of our civilization evolution, we really don't understand the laws of the universe and how to collaborate with the principles, the divine principles of life. So this book was transmitted. It was a series of lessons that I transmitted from a spiritual teacher many years ago when I was having some groups when I was living in California. And he went into a wide range of what are the principles of effective prayer or effective asking for help. And so it's learning to let go of what we think of what we want to happen or what we think should happen, and just offering up a motivation, a desire, an intention, and just kind of lifting it up to spirit and saying, okay, this is my request. I give it to you now. What do you want to do with it? I'm going to give you an example of something I saw in my spirit eyes a number of years ago. I remember a friend of mine, son, was deployed in Afghanistan, and praying for him, I lifted up a prayer for his safety and for his company, and I literally saw in my mind's eye an angel take that request from my mind, send it up to what you might call Command Central, where a lot of the angelic activity is coordinated, and then send it back down into the angel who was in charge of that group. And so we have to keep in mind that prayer is kind of like being sent on the wings of angels, metaphorically speaking, that we are actually invoking divine help in a situation. Now, this is a big coordination process, Some people aren't ready for the prayers that other people are speaking for them, but that spirit of that person is kind of capturing that prayer and knows what to do with it. So there's a lot to it. There's a whole lot to it. And the components of what makes a prayer effective are sincerity, letting go of the outcome, aligning your ideas, our own thoughts and expectations with that of the higher goals and values of the universe and for that person's highest good. So we can ask for all the help we want. It's up to there's a lot of different factors that go into it, whether that prayer will come to fruition or not, especially for another person. And if a person prays to win the lotto or to get a new car, well, that doesn't really have a lot of spiritual value. But if you pray for more peace, more strength, more encouragement, these are the kinds of prayers that have a better chance of being answered, because these are spiritual qualities that can be conveyed into a person through their own spiritual wiring, if you will. You can pray for a person's protection. Those kinds of things have a better chance of being answered than just something for a material request. So I hope that that clarifies some of the things on prayer.
Yes, it does. And what other things can? Well, first of all, mentioning the Urantia book, maybe I should have touched on this earlier in the interview, but just looked up the Urantia book here on Wikipedia. Say what you want about Wikipedia being a controversial source, but anyhow, it points out here, nonetheless, that the author for the Urantia book is anonymous. One would ask the question, well, they don't even know when it was. It just says originated in Chicago sometime between 1924 and in 1955. I mean, something you don't even know the author, and we don't even know when it actually originated. We just give a huge 30-year time span, kind of broad there. Doesn't it kind of raise a lot of questions about whether the book should be taken seriously, or then again, does the fact that this is a mystery make the book all the more worth taking seriously, because a lot of things are known about it, so there's probably a conspiracy to cover it up, perhaps. So maybe that it is worth looking into, as you've discovered. But do you take anything away from the fact that the authors are unknown and the time period it was
Well,
made?
that's not true. The authors
Okay.
are known, and the
Okay.
authors are identified at the end of each paper, but the authors are not human. The authors are spiritual and divine beings who have put together this incredible work of spiritual artistry of 196 papers, roughly about almost 2,100 pages of incredible insight and perspective about the nature of reality. And the book, all right, so this is, and it is going to be very controversial for a number of years until people understand how we function, in this greater cosmos. Okay, so you have a world that's been isolated from the rest of the universe. So you've got humans that are so fear-based, so warlike. So now you've got this big revelation of truth that is going to be seeded into the planet to help people understand the nature of reality and to begin to progress spiritually and morally. We've progressed technologically and materially, but we've lagged behind in our spiritual and moral development. So what does the realm of heaven do? How do you instill this greater picture of reality into a planet that is so fear-based and so skeptical of divine revelation? You do it in increments, okay? So what first started to happen, this is my understanding, that there was a person who still is anonymous and will probably always be anonymous, who was starting to speak certain ideas and concepts. Over time, this individual was brought into the notice of Dr. William Sadler, who was apparently at the time a preeminent psychiatrist. I think he's kind of known in the history books as the father of American psychiatry. He was brought to the attention of Dr. Sadler, and Dr. Sadler started to amass a group of people to study this information that was being compiled, that was coming from this individual who was kind of like in a sleep state, and this information was coming through. Over time, this was compiled into different papers and different subjects that were authored by these celestial beings. So this took a number of years because Dr. Sadler didn't know what this phenomenon was at first. And it took him a number of years to kind of get a handle that, oh, this is high level information. You know, this is something that has never happened before. We don't know how to deal with this. And he was a great debunker. He used to debunk all this psychic phenomenon, and he could not debunk this. And so over time, it was probably from I think I've heard dates as early as 1908 to about 1944 or so, when the first three parts of the book were compiled and then put into print. But the book wasn't finally published until 1955, when the people at the Urantia Foundation, which was organized to disseminate the book, got the go-ahead from the celestial helpers that they were working with, that it was time to publish and get the book out. So that's kind of like a brief history. The papers, some papers just materialized. For instance, the papers of Part 4 of the Jesus Life and Teachings, that's told from a celestial perspective. Those papers just materialized by spiritual beings who have the capacity to make things out, you know, just materialize things. So to me, everyone has to make their own decision, but you can't get the truth from reading it on Wikipedia or reading websites about it. You've got to look at the contents. There are several websites. Truthbook.com is a good website to see the book online, to go over the table of contents and to kind of pick and choose what area to read. But anyone would be very, very much edified by reading the life and teachings of Jesus. It's very easy to read. Some parts of the book are very philosophically dense, but not Part 4. Part 4 is so beautiful. And when you read about the life and teachings of Jesus, you really feel like you know him as a person. And you can only be uplifted and just bowled away by the artistry and the beauty of who he was, his personality as a human being. It's the book changed my life, and I can't even think how my life would have been had I not had that, and then gotten involved with the spiritual teachers that I did in the mid-90s that opened the whole, doing this healing work and having this ministry. So it's been the biggest blessing in my life, and I just encourage people to, hey, check it out yourself and see what it speaks to you. So there you go.
Thank you very much for getting into that. Also, I noticed on Wikipedia it's also said the Urantia book is the 5th apocryphal revelation. So what's 1 through 4?
Epical revelation. Epical revelation.
Right.
Okay. Well, when a planet is, when a material world like ours, an evolutionary world, is ready to evolve, there is divine help that comes with the ascension process for a planet. The first one is the planetary prince coming with his staff to shepherd the indigenous people to build, begin the foundations of a civilization, a real social culture, a real civilization, a civilized social culture. All right, the next divine revelation is the biologic uplifters. Now, in the Urantia book, they talk about the biologic uplifters as what they call a divine material son and daughter. And these are two individuals, male and female, and they come to the planet to endow their higher DNA to the indigenous people. But this happens over a long period of time. Now, their names are Adam and Eve. And there is, of course, the biblical account of Genesis of Adam and Eve, which is vastly different from the account of who Adam and Eve are in the cosmic hierarchy and their purposes for coming here. So that was the second one. Unfortunately, we did not get all of their divine DNA blended within our human DNA. And this is one of the problems that we're facing in our planetary transformation, because had we had more of their divine DNA, we would have been a much more spiritual and way, way, way less warlike and competitive with one another. The third epical revelation was a spiritual being by the name of Macaventa Melchizedek, who is also mentioned in the Bible. And the planet's conditions about, let's see, that was what, 4,000 years ago, was so dire that there had to be like an emergency dispensation of a divine being coming, or a spiritual being coming to the planet to keep the flame of the one God concept, a monotheistic concept, in place. So that was the fourth revelation of divine help. The third, I'm sorry, that was the third. The fourth one was Jesus, and he came as a human to show humanity the nature of how a human can craft their inner gifts and become more godlike in as a human. But he also came to reveal the love that he has for his children as a divine being. And so we know what happened to him. He was crucified. This was 2,000 years ago. So 2,000 years later, the celestial intelligence kind of keeping an eye on our planet, saying, okay, this planet is really, they're ready for a major upstepping now. Their technological and their understanding of technology is developed. Now they've got to get back on track with their spirituality and their morality. And that's why the Urantia book was put into English. And in Chicago, there were several other sites looked at, but Chicago was a very dynamic hub of learning at that time. And I just want to say one more thing about the anonymity of the contact person, is that the authors of the papers did not want any human associated with the teachings, because usually what happens is there's a cult that develops around the personality of the individual, and they wanted the teachings to stand on their own, and for every individual who reads the book to make up their own opinion whether or not this resonates their truth bells inside. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you. Going back, one of those ones, I think it was the third one where you mentioned 4,000 years ago. Did you say?
Yes, Macaventa Melchizedek. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you said the Earth was like in a dire strait or something at that time?
Well, in order for planets to evolve their spirituality, the monotheistic concept has to be very pronounced, that there is only one primal creator. Everything comes from that. But that idea, that concept was starting to flicker out, because there was a lot of pantheism and, a lot of different religious beliefs, with many gods, many hierarchies, and what the celestial intelligences were very concerned about is how are we going to keep this idea of a monotheistic concept going. And so they decided, one of these celestial personalities who was kind of caretaking the planet decided to incarnate here and help humans learn these higher teachings.
Yeah, I'm hearing that. For some reason, I'm thinking about when you say it was around 4,000 years ago, but is that could it have been as far as 5,000? And I ask that because for some reason I was thinking about the 5,000 year cycle in the Mayan calendar that ended on December 21st, 2012, but began in August something 3113 BC. And the thing about that, couple of significance behind that. One was it is said that there is geological evidence for some sort of a pole shift happening around that time period. Also, some Mayan book, the Jaguar Priest book, talks about how some interpretation rode to the stars, descended to the sky, and all the ancient astronaut theorists jumped on that and thought that that was an interpretation of ET's coming to Earth somehow in that time period to start the calendar. I'm thinking, could that have been the like something to do with the Melchizedek character that you're talking about here, or is the time period
Yeah,
off?
I don't know. I would not necessarily rule it out, but according to the account in the Urantia book, Melchizedek was basically placed in the area of Palestine because there was a little bit more receptivity for the monotheistic concept in that area, geographic area, and he was the one who kind of convinced Abraham to foster the monotheistic concept, and that was supposed to be the cocoon for Jesus to incarnate as a human. He had to come into an area and a mindset, a geographic and a mindset area where there was receptivity for this monotheistic concept, and Macaventa did encourage Abraham to be kind of like the father of this concept, and to hold it and conserve it, so that there would be a group of individuals that could accept and embrace the ideas that Jesus brought. Unfortunately, that went awry, but that's another story, and that's really very well accounted for in part 4 of the Urantia book, What Happened to Jesus.
All right, thank you for getting your take on that. Um, we're only 3 minutes away from 8 o'clock, so I
No,
guess I
yeah,
should.
isn't
I
it?
did.
Gee,
Time flies, I know, and
really
go
did.
faster for everybody. So, with that being said, you can take these last couple minutes here, get out anything you'd like to get out, anything that you think is worth pointing out. Make one last sales pitch of the things that you offer on your site, and any future things you're planning, and what you see for the future of humanity and its connection with Christ consciousness, heart, mind, God, and everything else. You got the floor to close us out.
Okay. Well, first of all, I am very, very excited about the future. I think we are living in a very dynamic time where people are being encouraged to open up to their spirituality in whatever way they're being guided, so that more people are sharing these ideas and not being afraid to discuss their own spiritual beliefs. Um, the Center for Christ Consciousness is evolving, and we are actually moving into a new organization, a new organizational structure, and this is called the Institute of Christ Consciousness, which will begin on January 1st. I will be keeping the Center for Christ Consciousness website as a resource for people to read about the different things under that Living Christ Consciousness page that we went over during the interview. But the focus of this Institute of Christ Consciousness is to actually implement and institute Christ consciousness on a planet. So we will be having more healers available for people to do healings at all different levels. We'll be doing a lot of more training and teaching of these bigger cosmic concepts, and to also build a community so that there will be like these seed little local areas where people can go and learn more about Christ consciousness and participate in this great planetary upliftment. Now, this is an endeavor that will take some time to develop, but this is our new direction. There'll be a new website. This will be all announced in a few weeks. We're still I'm working with my board to develop this now, but this is an exciting new venture because we're reaching out to a wider audience and helping people understand this concept of Christ consciousness and how we can implement it not only personally, but on a planetary scale as well. So we're very excited about this, and it's a whole new ballgame, and we're just collaborating with more spiritual helpers, and we have so much help to embark upon this path and to help people understand the nature of what we're going through at this time. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share this with your listening audience, and I thank you, Andrew, for letting me come on tonight.
And I thank you very much for coming on. Great show. I'll try to do my best to upload it by tomorrow. Tonight, I'll probably just be able to convert it to a format that can be uploaded, but I'll get it on tomorrow. I also have a lot of catching up to do with my show to get a lot of. You're the last guest on my schedule. I need to get contact a whole slew of potential guests, and that's going to take some time too. So I'll try to get your show uploaded before I do that, and I'll send you the link to when it comes on. I mean, if you want to friend me on Facebook, respond to my friend
Sure.
request, and I can post the link on your timeline for more people to see if that's okay with you. So
Yes, it'd be fine. Thank
all right,
you.
awesome. Thank you very
Okay.
much. Enjoy your trek through consciousness. Namaste.
Namaste to you too, Andrew. Thank